Hello and greetings. Here we are back again. I think officially now we are in the second half of the course, running out of the tunnel for the second half, and we come to another region. We come to a region that is relatively small, perhaps not as small as our last region, South Asia, but um, not as big as some other ones. Not as big as some other ones. But there's a saying that size is not everything, as this region here is one of the world's most influential regions, although it's maybe one of the smaller ones, right? And it's probably been that way, influential for a long, long time. Some would even say, it is the most significant of all the world regions. I think maybe I do. I think maybe I do. And it's because of maybe one spot that we'll talk about that drives all the other conflict around it. I'm talking about Northern Africa and Southwestern Asia, or what is commonly called the Middle East. Okay. And the region has long served as a physical and cultural crossroads between Europe, Africa, and Asia. That's important enough right there. Significant enough right there. And it's home to early civilizations and the birthplace of three major religions. Its recent history is one of high population growth, oil wealth, right? Important, and political conflict. So turn to page 200, and there you will see Jerusalem's splendid Dome of the Rock. I would normally have you go right to the regional maps on page 202, 203, which I want you to do as soon as you look at the Dome of the Rock. But I wanted to take you right to 200 because I just enjoy Islamic architecture and art for the most part. Most certainly the Dome of the Rock. Religion has played such a defining role through the region, and you got the three major monotheistic religions, right? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in that order at which they came. They all originated in this region we're going to take a look at here, and all three are found throughout the world too. Islam is the most dominant, though. Islam's the most dominant in the region, but it's not homogeneous, right? Because it has key divisions, and we'll talk about that too. Majority of Muslims are Sunni. Shia Muslims make up for about 90%, though, of the Iranian population, and constitute a majority of the Iraqi population as well. So look at, here we go. Our lecture notes for the week: Northern Africa and Southwestern Asia. Some of the where we want to go, I should say objectives there. We want to get to, let's get that out of there. The objectives. I want to point out why the region is the world's religious hearth. Understand the importance of water politics in the region. Understand the Arab-Israeli conflict. You're going to get a good education on that, if nothing else. And I want to generalize MENA's population and urban patterns. MENA, right? The Middle East and North Africa. So the Middle East region we're taking a look at, MENA means Middle East and North Africa. Some heads up terms here, and there are a lot of them. Monotheism, right? The belief in one God. The diaspora, the dispersion of the Jewish nation in AD 70 by the Romans. This is key. Shiite Muslims, maybe the more conservative, the Sunni, more moderate. Calligraphy is an art form with religious significance. Farsi is the language in Iran. It's a Persian language. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum and Export Countries, an oil cartel that determines market oil prices. Pan-Arabism, the goal of having one Arab state. The Arab League, united against Israel. Islamism, political Islam, right? Political Islam via holy wars, right? Radical Islam. The Caliphate, a Sunni empire led by an heir of Muhammad, according to goals of Al Qaeda and ISIS. The Arab Spring. I'm not going to get to the Arab Spring. I'm just not going to have time. The Arab Spring, early 2000s, 2010s actually, basically a crusade to remove corruption in throughout the Middle East. It removed guys like Hosni Mubarak out of Egypt, Muammar Gaddafi out of Libya, looking to get Saddam Hussein out of Iraq, right? The old guard, not good guys, right, by any stretch of the imagination, but it was replaced by, believe it or not, even more radical people, right? So anyway, that's about as much as I'm going to say on the Arab Spring. I'd like to talk about it, I'm not going to have time. Islamism. Islamism is, again, political Islam, and you got jihad. Jihad is a holy war connected to Islamism. Khomeini, the Ayatollah Khomeini, right? The Ayatollah Khomeini coming out of Iran. He led the Shiite democracy in Iran. Sharia law, this is religious law based off the Quran. Medina, we'll talk about Medina. We'll look at Medina. Medina is the historic sector of Islamic cities, right? Muslim cities. The Quran, your Islamic holy book. The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, right? A terror organization looking to drive Israel out of the Palestinian areas. Hydropolitics. This is water politics. We'll spend some time on that. Al Qaeda, the global terror group, headed up by Osama bin Laden. ISIS, not going to deal with that too much. ISIS, pretty much a thing in the past now, I believe. But ISIS would be, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The right to return, I'll be mentioning that several times. So it's, probably crucial to use that and make that as a heads up term. That is the Palestinian refugees. They have a right to return to Palestine. Several reasons why they were forced out of Palestine, right? The 6-Day War, after the Israelites, the Israelis come back to their homeland. The neighboring Arab states look to drive them out in 1967. And there is the 6-Day War, right? And that doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen. The Israelis are victorious, and we'll talk about the after effects of that. The occupied territories, right? Occupied by Israel after the 6-Day War, as we'll see. After every skirmish, their bitter war is really to get the Israelis, force them out of Palestine. The Israelis are victorious, be a little spoiler there, and they gain more territory. All right, the occupied territories. The Arab-Israeli War in 1973, kind of a redux of what happened in 1967, right, with the 6-Day War. Camp David Accords in 1979, an agreement between Israel and Egypt. Egypt would recognize Israel in return for gaining one of the occupied territories, right, the Sinai Peninsula. And then the Temple Mount, or the Dome of the Rock, which the Dome of the Rock, which I just talked about, sacred to both the Jews and Muslims. 2 Jewish temples once stood in that spot. Today, the Dome of the Rock and the Al Aqsa Mosque are there, right? So more on that in a few moments, why that's so significant. All right, let's get into this. So religion, 1000 AD, monotheism. By that point, monotheism dominates the region. You have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Islam comes about around 622 AD. Muhammad sees a vision of the angel Gabriel. Judaism, AD 70. Of course, Judaism's been around thousands of years. The Romans destroyed Jerusalem, dispersing the Jews throughout the region and Europe, otherwise known as the diaspora. Christianity, you have divisions over who Jesus was. You have your Orthodox and Catholic split from 395 AD to 1453. The Eastern Church settles in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, the Western Church in Rome, right? And then Islam, the Holy Book, the Quran, is the word of Allah revealed to Muhammad. The Shiites, the Shia Muslim, they comprise 90% of Iran, 60% of Iraq. They are the conservative wing in the faith. The Sunni are the more secular of the two wings. And you can look at figure 622, I would say too also. The visuals are always very important. But in this chapter, we are going to need to look at those a bit more. 622, and sometimes I forget to write the page numbers down with all the heavy lifting here, and I apologize for that. Page 217 just gives you, you guys can check this out on your own, gives you the religions of the Middle East: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. You'll see right off the bat that Islam is very dominant, but you have pockets. You have pockets of the others. Languages, Arabic, and you have a set of notes here. I'll just talk about it for you auditory learners. Arabic spoken by about 50% of those in the region. The majority Muslim group is Sunni, based on the Quran, supplemented by tradition. Sunnis are the more moderate wing in the Muslim sect, as I said. Calligraphy is the most important art form. It contains religious significance of the Quran. I think you see some of that on the outsides of the Dome of the Rock and a lot of your Muslim architecture. The Indo-European languages are significant. Farsi is the official language of Iran. And again, figure 622, page 217, there it is. I did have the page number on that, but you can see the religions of MENA, the Middle East and North Africa. I want to talk about the climates briefly here, and you can turn to page 205 as I talk about this, because you're going to see a climate map as well as a population map, which is crucially related to the climates. So yeah, the arid climates dominate, right, the region, with humid climates found in the mountainous areas of northwestern Africa and Turkey, as well as the eastern Mediterranean. As a result, water is, and we'll get to this, importance of this, water is a scarce commodity throughout the region and human activity. Whether agriculture or urbanization is concentrated in the major river valleys and other locations where there's a significant amount of water that's available. Rapid population growth has increased focus on some of the region's environmental problems. The most extensive pollution problems are related to salinization, right, of irrigated agricultural land and the oil industry pollution at locations of extraction and processing. Page 205 will give you something to look at there. All right, after World War II, Southwest Asian and North African countries became strategic in the light of Cold War tension, right, with Israel, Soviets, and the U.S., and the huge demand for oil. Enter Pan-Arabism, united opposition. The Arab League was created in 1948 as a response to the creation of Israel in the region. Initially 7 nations. Today it comprises 21 and includes the terror group, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Egypt was expelled in 1979 as a result of an accord with Israel recognizing its existence. The Arab League headquarters was therefore switched out of Cairo, Egypt, to Tunis, Tunisia. And in 2020, with President Trump presiding, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, and Bahrain signed accords normalizing relations with Israel. Islamism, political Islam. Political Islam's victory was in Iran in 1979, right? The radical elements of it. You had the Holy War, jihad. The main success of political Islam, the Islamic Revolution under Khomeini in Iran, and figure 639 on page 238, you can see a picture of that uprising. Developed in a few seconds here. And then you had Islamic law, Sharia, became official in Iran in 1983, the sacred law of Islam. Here's the thing, though, extreme terror that was being preached there has yet to really yield much. So here's the deal with Iran. Iran was once a strategic partner with the United States until ally Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, the emperor, was deposed by the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979, who brought about an anti-U.S. Shiite democracy to Iran. Iran is previously known as Persia, and here's the thing, it's not Arab, right? It's not Arab, and this causes some controversies in the region. It's not Arab. Thus, it is historic animosity with Arabs. The biggest bone of contention, Iran is Shiite Persian, okay? While their biggest rivals, the Saudi Arabians and Iraq, are Sunni Arab, okay? So ethnicity kind of trumps religion, right? Interesting strains of this. Shiite Arabs side with Iraq over Iran, where Iraq Shiites side with Iranian forces when they entered Iraq to fight Sunni ISIS a few years back. Now, there's concern from Western capitals over Iran's nuclear program, its potential use against Israel, beginning with an arms race in the region. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they have their suspicions about this too. Iran says it's using the program for research in electricity and medicine. So, led by the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations, and several other countries, they have levied sanctions, which cut off investment and finance on Iran. The Israelis, they regard Iran's nuclear program as a threat and have signaled that their sanction could be more than just a sanction. It could be a surprise attack on Iran. So, yeah, some room for nervousness, right? The chance for U.S. Iranian nuclear negotiations are in everybody's common interests. Regional stability, webs of refugees in the war aftermath, and maintaining Sunni terrorist groups. For instance, for example, like Al Qaeda and ISIS. The Obama administration did lift sanctions on Iran, provided that the IAEA would be able to monitor the nuclear development and promise to halt any kind of nuclear development that they would find. The Trump administration pulled out of that agreement, led by Israel's skepticism of, just not trusting Iran's word. The Biden administration's pretty much been on the fence with that, getting back in on that. They have lifted some sanctions, though. Oil resources. The Persian Gulf is believed to contain close to 70% of the world's oil resources. According to CNN, the United States does, if we frack, right? If we frack. Interesting. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC. Okay. It's a cartel. It's a cartel that coordinates the interest of producing countries by regulating prices. For example, OPEC, it's headquartered in Vienna, 12 countries, Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Iran. You can look at the rest of those countries. In fact, you can see where they're located. Take a look at page 226, figure 631. You have a map of where those countries are. Water politics. Water politics. Water is not evenly distributed. 80% of the region's water is found in the Nile River Valley of Egypt and the Tigris and Euphrates basins in Iraq. So in the future, water may surpass oil as the critical resource in Southwestern Asia. And you can turn to page 232 to look at those basins, the Nile River and, the Nile River and its tributaries. I'm thinking back now on page 232, whether that has the Tigris and Euphrates River basins. It does not. But you can look at the Nile River, left-hand side of the page, which is actually north. You can see the Nile. The Nile flows from right to left, though. It flows into the Mediterranean Sea. And over on the next page, over on page 229, there is the Tigris and Euphrates basins. Okay, you can see it cutting through Iraq, the green, green lines there. They'd be the Tigris, Euphrates rivers. And there's the Persian Gulf, right? Talking about the Persian Gulf region containing so much of the world's oil. Water politics. I'm going to call that hydropolitics. Hydropolitics, water politics. It's an explosive in this arid region. And there you have figure 634 on page 231. And you could see again the, a little map there of where water is in, the Palestinian area where Israel is, right? The Oslo II Accords out of Norway said that 80% of the water coming from the West Bank aquifers would go to Israel. And that page 231, you can, again, take a look at the mountain aquifers there. It's the green striped areas, right? So the Oslo Accords said that 80% of that water coming from the West Bank aquifers would go to Israel and 20% would go to the Palestinians. Keep that in mind as we get into the tensions between these two groups. So the Palestinians would become dependent on Israel freshwater aquifers as the Palestinian population continues to grow. And this is a major reason why the Israeli policy makers oppose a Palestinian state in the West Bank. We'll look at the West Bank here soon. Dan, keep your page near page 231. I think, yeah, you can turn to that and talk about the Red Dead Canal or Red Dead Sea. A 2013 agreement between Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority to build a pipeline sending seawater from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. So desalination, and that's basically taking the salt out of the water, right? Desalination is a way for Middle Eastern countries to change their fresh water supplies, but it's costly. It's very, very costly. The world's largest is in Saudi Arabia, which treats about 370 million gallons. Of course, Saudis are able to pay for it by the oil money, right, that they incur. So the geography of hydropolitics, upstream and downstream countries. Water flowing downstream give upstream countries leverage, turning the advantage into a zero-sum game that there are going to be some winners and some losers. There are occasions where a downstream country could wield an upper hand. For instance, Israel is downstream from Syria, and they threaten to bomb any Syrian dams built on the Jordan River. All right, you can see the Jordan River on page 230, 231. Egypt is the ultimate downriver country, right? They signed the Nile Water Agreement back in 1929 with Great Britain, who represented, and you can take a look at the map on, again, we're flipping the pages around here. Turn the map on page 232. Egypt's a downriver country, and you can take a look at, the countries that the Nile River is flowing through, right? That's Egypt's dependent on. So Great Britain represented a lot of those countries there: Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanganyika. And there was a treaty signed that forbade projects that threatened to impede water volume to Egypt. And figure 635 shows you all that. Any use of water from, and you can see Lake Victoria there, right? Lake Victoria is right in the middle of Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, right? Lake Victoria would need Egypt's approval, right? And Egypt had the right to inspect the Nile for, any violations of the treaty. But, many of the nations have defied the treaty. Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, they each have built their own dams along the Nile River. Population distribution and dynamics. The major cause of high population is water availability, right? So where the water is where the population is in this arid region. Tunis reduced their population growth shortly after independence. They have a maximum age for marrying and family planning. The region's life expectancy at large is about 70 years old. Iraq, theirs had dipped below 60 as a result of, the war. Syria, I think Syria's refugee problem and the civil war in Syria has caused their population, the average age to dip as well. Urban patterns. Much of North African cities surround enclaves of old trading and agricultural centers. You have high densities of homes, commercial premises, and public buildings within cities, mark traditional small towns of the region, and central Medinas named after the sacred Muslim city in Saudi Arabia. And it's also valued for social and structural fabric as well as historic sectors. Page 214, figure 617, your authors very smartly have a illustration of the typical Medina historical sector in the Muslim cities, and how that's broken down. Human rights, literacy rates, 67% of the men can read, just 25% of the ladies are literate. You have your Kurds in northern Iraq, southeastern Turkey, and parts of Syria and Iran long have pressed for their own nation. Kurdistan, long been persecuted. Page 259, figure 660, shows you a map there that of where the Kurds actually are. And if, in a perfect world for the Kurds, if that got divided up right, where Kurdistan would be. So that would be taking chunks of land out of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, right? Some of Syria. And, well, they're not about to do that. Okay. So, with some of the uprisings in those areas, they've been persecuted by those governments. Terrorism. Got a set of notes here. Terrorism, the George W. Bush years, 2001, 2009, were consumed with the war on terror. The goal, destroy enemies who attack the United States and its allies using preemptive strikes to ward off future attacks. You see a problem, you don't wait for it. You go in, you do something about it. The Obama and Trump administrations deployed the controversial drone strikes, which arguably collected innocent civilians and would cause further anti-U.S. sentiment in the Arab world. A Homeland Security Department was developed. I'd like to talk about that. That's for government, right? A lot of government growth there. Take a big waste, basically doing the CIA's work. But again, I don't want to go there. Developed to protect against terrorism with infrastructure and intelligence capabilities. The aims of radical Islamists, political and cultural. They wanted to remove the U.S. and Israeli interests in the region. Al-Qaeda under Osama bin Laden, 1998, the Al-Qaeda agency headed by wealthy Saudi businessman Osama bin Laden bombed 2 U.S. embassies as part of a jihad against American imperialism and immoral culture. Before the shocking 2001 bombings, there was also an attack on a U.S. naval destroyer in Yemen. Al-Qaeda, otherwise known as the base in Arabic, was developed to unify Islamic militants globally against the Soviets back in the late 70s and early 80s with U.S. help, right? And they were headquartered in Pakistan. Its goal, to protect sacred space against the infidels, non-Muslims, right? Which would include pro-Western regimes that they're in the Midwest or Mideast, specifically liberating the holy sites in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, right? Thereby establishing a caliphate. The caliphate, real quickly, if you look at the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire before the Crimean War of the 1850s, Turkey wound up a big loser in that. So did Russia to an extent. The victors were the Western European powers, specifically France and Britain. But before, and then they carved all that area up. So that's what ISIS was kind of about, getting back that caliphate, pre-Muslim borders, the Ottoman Empire territory of Turkey before the Crimean War. So even after bin Laden died in 2011, his longtime deputies continue to train fighters in Afghanistan. Now I saved the big enchilada to last here. We've got Israel and the Palestinian territories. I would suggest, if you haven't been doing this, look at the maps I show you, right, for this to make some sense, make more sense to you. Israel proclaimed, it's like, why all this trouble? And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you as good of a synopsis on this as you'll find, right? Israel proclaimed Jerusalem as capital in 1950. The United States and most countries do not recognize this, right? Jerusalem as the capital, and they keep their embassies in Tel Aviv, Israel. President Trump again recognized Jerusalem in December of 2017. So the only countries with embassies now that have moved their embassies to Jerusalem are the United States. Of course, we did that in 2018. Honduras and Kosovo did it in 2021. And actually, Guatemala is the fourth. Guatemala's always had their embassy there since 1959. But, and this is where we're going, Jerusalem is a problem in the overall picture. Now, what I would suggest you do as you're watching this, I would just peruse for a few minutes pages 219 through 222 and, look at, look at the captions, right? And then get back to the lecture here, which I'm going to do right now, the Arab-Israeli conflict. Folks, it revolves around religion, land, and water resources. Look at figure 641 on page 240. And again, Israel, the occupied territories, parts of the West Bank and the Golan Heights and the surrounding areas. Those are controversial land areas that I'm going to talk about. Palestine was controlled by Turkey up through their defeat at the hands of England and France in World War I. Palestine was then divided up by the victors, vying for resources, right? There we go again, England involved in dividing something up. Okay, so the British goal, and again, page 241, figure 642, I would strongly urge that you stop the tape and go through figure 642, figure 643, and 644, and then come back to hearing me, right? And keep an eye on those things too as I talk about them. So the British goal divide up Palestine by giving land to both the Palestinians and the area to the Jews, right, as their religious homeland. Remember, the Jews were kicked out of that in AD 70 and dispersed around the globe. This is their promised land, right? Their biblical promised land, all of which was met by extreme discord by each side, prompting a British exit from the area in 1947. Even with India, where we talked about Kashmir, dividing that up between the Hindus and the Muslims. This kind of makes sense. It's not without sense, but you're just not going to please everyone, and but you're going to please little. You're going to very little amount of people. So the British exit from the area in 1947, right? Bad year for the British. They exited India too in 1947. Well, the Israelis acted on the British plan, proclaiming its existence as a nation in May of 1948. They looked to return to their land, prompting war with several Arab countries. Israel in 1948, they were the victors. Hence what is called and you'll hear about this, make settlements, make agreements to the pre-1967 borders. This is what they're talking about. And you can see figure 643, page 241, right? Hopefully you've already looked at that. But here's the thing. When the Israelis start entering the region again, both displaced Palestinians and local governments demanded the right to return to their homes pre-war, pre-1967 borders. Hence, the right to return. We'll talk about that again here in a few minutes. So your neighboring Arab countries assume control of areas in Palestine not absorbed by Israel. Enter the Six-Day War, right? Six-Day War. Egypt's President Nasser shut positioning arms at the Strait of Tiran, Strait of Tiran. I'll get that right. Thinking of Tehran, Iran, Strait of Tiran, the choke point to the Gulf of Aqaba, ostensibly closing off any Israeli shipping. Page 641, page 240. As you look at find the Red Sea on page 240, look at the Red Sea at the bottom of that inset map, and you can see the Gulf of Aqaba going between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. That was the area there, that choke point, that was owned by the Egyptians, and President Nasser cuts that off, right? He cuts that off from any ships to be able to get anything to Israel. So, both of your both of these countries get there's a lot of tension here. Israel made a preemptive strike on Egyptian and Syrian air forces at this juncture. Jordan, and you can look at the map on page 241. Yeah, 240. You can see Jordan nearby Israel, right? Jordan. Lost my place there. Jordan chose to get involved and lost the old city of Jerusalem. Jordan had a part of that, right, of Jerusalem. They lost that. The Gaza Strip was seized, right? The Gaza Strip over on page 241, figure 643. Again, along the Mediterranean coast is the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip was seized, as was the Sinai Peninsula. This part of Egypt was seized by the Israelis. Okay, right over in here. And the Golan Heights, right? The Golan Heights are up here and, bordering Syria and Lebanon. Okay, that was also seized by the Israelis. And, so these are called the occupied territories. Now they're called the occupied territories. So the remaining Palestinians from the 1948-49 war, they were residing in camps, not occupied by the Israelis. They were in essence now forced out or fled to neighboring countries once more. So these neighboring countries, they have water problems too, right? They have water problems, and they're not going to be able to stand the strain of all this. So, the big picture, you've got to drive Israel out. So the Arab-Israeli War of 1973, right? On October 6th, Israel and Syria looked to reverse humiliating losses in the Six-Day War in 1967. So with Israel on the doorstep of Syria's capital, Damascus, the UN gets involved and they broker a ceasefire. In the wake, the Israelis gain access to the east side of the Suez Canal, which reopened commercial traffic to their nation. So each time these things are happening, the Arab nations are losing ground. The Israelis are gaining more territory. So the demographic dimension, a much more population has settled into the occupied territories since the late 70s. The occupied territories are predominantly Arab, and to annex those territories would reduce the nation's Jewish majority to 60% of the population. So many Jews oppose further settlement, as does the United States and the Geneva Conventions. Again, looking at those maps, the West Bank is comprised a lot of biblical lands, making it problematic as it is regarded as Israel's historical homeland. So Israel, or Jerusalem as the capital. It's a highly sensitive issue. They recognize Jerusalem as the capital. To recognize Jerusalem as the capital is kind of tantamount to accepting Israel's sovereignty, okay? So Tel Aviv has been internationally recognized as Israel's capital. We spoke about that earlier. 2017, President Trump announced the American embassy in Israel would move to Jerusalem. The settlements and Israeli occupation has been the cause of much internal tension between Palestinians and the Israeli government. So land for peace. Land for peace. The occupied territories account for a small piece of real estate. Giving that up is alarming to an already small-sized nation surrounded by enemies, right? See figure 646, page 244. Very interesting inset map there. This is what it would be like for Israel to give up those occupied territories. It'd be like, in New England. Take a look at New England and giving up, New Hampshire. Well, New Hampshire, the size of Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, compared with New England and the Benelux countries in Europe. So it'd be a lot of real estate. So the formula began in 1979 at the Camp David Accords. Israel swapped Arab territory acquired during the 1967 Six-Day War in exchange for peace with their neighbors. So what Israel did was they returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, who in turn recognized Israel's right as a sovereign state. The Oslo Accords laid the groundwork for a limited autonomy for the Palestinians in the occupied territories. Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, he became the head of the new government, the Palestinian Authority. A 5-year timetable was set to settle other issues, such as the political status of Jewish and Muslim holy places in Jerusalem, the right to return, the return of Palestinian refugees from 1948-1967 wars, the Jewish settlement issues in occupied territories, and Palestinian independence and statehood. These issues have not been settled, leading to ongoing conflict. The major issue that blocks final process is Jerusalem, right? Make no mistake about that. And its holy sites, especially the Temple Mount. See figure 647, figure 245, and you have zones of control. As we wind this up here, I want you to look at what the issues are, and not to take up much more time, but the water politics, you might be able to solve that, right? But the religious significance to Jerusalem, I'm not so sure about. Let's take a look at them. Jerusalem's important. Jerusalem's importance for Jews. For Jews, Jerusalem is the capital city of the nation, Israel, where King Solomon once built his temple, the temple of Yahweh, which was completely destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. Jerusalem's also the site of the Western Wall. All right, the Western Wall is the last remains of the temples that David built. It was the city, this city, that the Jews believe Yahweh called his own. Jerusalem's importance for Muslims. For Muslims, there is the Dome of the Rock, where Muhammad, their prophet, made a nighttime journey to the heavens. It is the site where the Muslims believe their prophet ascended into heaven. Jerusalem's importance to Christians. Jerusalem has always been significant to Christians because of the places there where Jesus ministered, and most importantly, where they believe he died and rose again. In 2020, the Abraham Accords were conducted via the Trump administration, where the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Bahrain established diplomatic ties, right? Yeah, nothing small there. So there you have it. Because of time, I'm going to have you guys know where the graphic organizers are, and you can recap that. There's a lot to look at. You guys have been listening to me long enough today. What's up ahead? You're reading a couple short readings in your textbook. Sunni and Shiite Muslims. I want page 224. I'd like for you to read that, and we'll address that with the discussion questions. And geography of sacred space. The geography of sacred space, very short inset there, page 244. I'd like for you to read that. And a couple short videos, the spread of Islam, women in Islam, Turkey and Iran, right? Turkey and Iran. I used to cover that, but as geography is changing, I don't have time to cover certain things, and but I like that one. I'd like for you to check that one out. Thursday, right in the news. Friday, we have the initial post due. Saturday, the 2 response posts by 11:59. Monday, we quiz, be available 12:01 a.m. And then we begin to look at probably the poorest region of the world, Africa, sub-Sahara. And there you have it. No, again, as always, you guys know how to get a hold of me. Don't ever hesitate. And have a great week and do everything well. And I'll be talking to you soon. All right. Bye-bye.